The Han River was a vein of liquid obsidian cutting through the neon anatomy of Seoul. From the 44th floor of the Ether Penthouse, the city looked like a circuit board, cold, efficient, and indifferent. Inside, the air was different. It smelled of ozone, copper, and the sickly sweet scent of amouage perfume, a fragrance that cost more than Suji's first car. Suji didn't enter through the grand foyer. She emerged from the service elevator, a ghost in a black catering uniform, carrying a matte black designer briefcase. To any security guard watching the monitors, she was just another late-night luxury server. To the syndicate, she was the ghost architect. The scene was a mess. A disruption, Director Han had called it. In the center of the white silk rug, the victim lay in a twisted geometry of limbs. The blood had already begun to oxidize, turning from a vibrant arterial red to a dull maroon. Suji didn't feel pity. Pity was a contaminant. She felt a clinical irritation at the lack of professional discipline. Whoever had done this had been emotional. They had left narrative behind, and it was Suji's job to delete the story. She knelt, her movements precise and ritualistic. She opened the briefcase. Inside lay the tools of her trade: pH neutralizers, synthetic fiber sprayers, and her pride, the portable DNA sequencer. Step 1. Neutralize the biological narrative, she whispered. Her voice was thin, like parchment. She began by spraying a fine mist over the rug. The luminol-based reagent didn't just glow, it mapped. Under her UV goggles, the room transformed into a battlefield of splatters. She began to scrub, not with the frantic energy of a janitor, but with the steady hand of a surgeon. She replaced the victim's DNA with a noise cocktail, a mixture of animal proteins and synthetic human markers designed to send a police lab into a 5-year backlog of confusion. Then she saw it. A single silver blonde hair was caught in the jagged, broken casing of the victim's Patek Philippe watch. It was a trophy of a struggle. Suji reached out with a pair of ceramic tweezers. She felt a sudden, sharp spike of vertigo, a sensory trigger. The smell of the perfume in the room suddenly shifted in her mind to the smell of a hospital corridor. For a split second, her vision flickered. She saw a needle. She felt a cold fluid entering her vein. She blinked the memory away, her breath hitching. She placed the hair into the sequencer. Analyzing. The machine pulsed in a soft blue light. Suji sat back on her heels, watching the Han River. She counted her heartbeats. In her line of work, you lived by the data. The data never lied, and it never felt. The sequencer chimed. Suji looked at the screen. Match found. Internal profile 00-architect. Suji's blood turned to ice. She ran the diagnostic again. The sequencer wasn't matching the hair to a criminal database or a civilian record. It was matching it to her. But as her eyes scanned the metadata, the horror deepened. The biological age of the DNA sample was 38. Suji looked at her own hands. Smooth, steady, 28-year-old hands. Impossible, she breathed. She touched her scalp. Her hair was black, dyed frequently to remain nondescript. She pulled a strand of her own hair and fed it into the second slot of the sequencer. The machine compared the two. 99.9% genetic overlap. Temporal variance, plus 10 years. It was her DNA, but it was from a future she hadn't lived yet, or a past she had been forced to forget. A heavy vibration shook the floor, the heavy pressurized thud of the penthouse's main entrance opening. Suji didn't move. She couldn't. She stared at the blue screen. The DNA of a 10-year-older version of herself was at a crime scene she was sent to clean. Are we clean, Suji? The voice was deep, raspy, and belonged to Director Han's personal enforcer, a man known only as the Hammer. He stood at the edge of the silk rug, his shadow stretching over the victim. His eyes dropped to the sequencer in Suji's hand. Suji felt the weight of the silenced Glock in her waistband. She had 3 seconds to hide the screen or explain why she was cleaning up her own ghost. Suji tilts the screen toward her body just as the Hammer reaches for the device. Almost, she says, her voice trembling. There's a secondary signature. I need to run a deep clean protocol. Tell the director there was an unexpected complication. The Hammer narrows his eyes, stepping closer until the toe of his boot touches Suji's knee. The director doesn't like complications, architect. She likes erasures. Suji's sanctuary was a basement in Mapo-gu, hidden beneath an abandoned dry cleaning shop. The smell of perchloroethylene acted as a natural deterrent to the curious. Inside, the room was a sterile white box. No windows, no personal photos. Only a workbench, a high-grade incinerator, and a row of identical black suits. She was scrubbing. She had been scrubbing for 3 hours. She had been scrubbing for 3 hours. Her cuticles were raw, the skin around her nails white and shriveled from the bleach. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the blue light of the sequencer. 99.9% match. She wasn't just Suji. She was a biological recurring theme. She stood up, her legs cramping, and walked to the wall-mounted terminal. She initiated a secure link. The screen flickered, and the face of Kim appeared. He was in a PC bang in Dongdaemun, the blue light of a dozen monitors reflecting off his thick glasses. He was eating ramyun, the steam fogging his lenses. Kim, Suji said, I need the 2016 forensic archives from the SMP. Kim stopped chewing. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his expression shifting from bored to wary. Suji, we talked about this. You don't dig in the graveyard. It's bad for the lungs. I found something at the ether job, she said, her voice dropping. A hair. My hair. But the markers showed a 10-year degradation. It's me, Kim. But it's an older me. Kim went silent. The only sound was the frantic clicking of keyboards from the teenagers in the background of his shop. He leaned in closer to the camera. Suji, listen to me carefully. I've handled your data for 3 years. I've scrubbed your trail 100 times. But I can't find anything on you from 2016. Because I was a cop then, Suji snapped. Check the SMP personnel files. I did, Kim whispered. Suji, you don't understand. According to the SMP, according to the National Registry, and according to the syndicate's own payroll history, you died in 2016, a car fire on the Mapo Bridge. Dental records confirmed. You were buried in a closed casket. The room seemed to tilt. Suji leaned against the workbench. Then who am I, Kim? Who is the woman in this room? You're the ghost architect, Kim said, his voice trembling. But Suji, the data says you're the 4th one I've had this conversation with. The air in the basement felt suddenly thin. A sensory trigger hit her like a physical blow. The sound of a ticking clock. It wasn't in the room. It was in her head. A rhythmic, mechanical pulsing. She turned to the mirror. She grabbed a pair of surgical scissors and began to hack at the hair behind her right ear. She cut deep, ignoring the sting of the blades. There, buried under the skin, was a small, hard lump. She pressed the scissors against it, sliced, and a microtransponder, no larger than a grain of rice, fell into the sink. It was stamped with a logo she recognized, the Han Institute. Suddenly, the monitor on her wall flickered. The PC bang background disappeared. A new image appeared. It was a live feed of the dry cleaning shop above her. Two black SUVs had pulled up. Men in tactical gear were exiting. Leading them was Detective Ji-won, her old partner. Ji-won looked haggard, her eyes rimmed with red, clutching a file with Suji's signature on it. "They're here," Kim hissed through the audio. "Someone pinged your location the moment you cut that tracker. Suji, run." Cliffhanger. Suji grabs her briefcase and heads for the emergency chute, but she stops. On the monitor, she sees Detective Ji-won pick up a discarded candy wrapper from the shop floor, the specific brand Suji always chewed to mask the smell of bleach. Ji-won looks directly into the security camera, as if she can see Suji through the floor. "I know you're down there," Ji-won whispers, "and I know what you are." 24 hours before the Penthouse, the Jogyesa Temple was an island of stillness in the roaring heart of Seoul. The scent of incense was thick, a heavy, herbal fog that usually calmed Suji's nerves. Today, it felt like a shroud. Suji sat on a wooden bench, watching the colorful lanterns sway in the breeze. She felt balanced. This was her day zero. Every month, Director Han invited her here for the calibration. "You look tired, Suji," a voice purred. Suji didn't turn. She didn't need to. Director Han sat down beside her. She was dressed in a charcoal-colored silk hanbok, her silver hair pinned back with a jade barrette. She looked like a queen mother, serene and untouchable. "The work is demanding, Mother," Suji replied. She used the title because it felt right, even if she couldn't remember the woman's actual role in her birth. Han was the one who had found her after the accident. Han was the one who had taught her how to turn her forensic genius into a weapon. "The ether job will be your masterpiece," Han said, reaching out to pat Suji's hand. Her skin was unnaturally cold. "It's a high-profile erasure. A senator's son was indiscreet. You must be perfect. No traces, no narratives." "I'm always perfect," Suji said, but her head began to throb, a sharp, localized pain behind her right ear. "The headaches again?" Han sighed, reaching into her designer bag. She produced a small, pre-filled syringe. "The city air is toxic to someone with your sensitivity, Suji. This will stabilize your neural pathways." Suji didn't hesitate. She rolled up her sleeve. She trusted Han implicitly. Han was the only anchor she had in a world of shifting shadows and erased bloodstains. As the needle slid into her skin, Suji felt a wave of artificial calm wash over her. The pain vanished. The world sharpened. "There," Han whispered. "Now remember the rule, Suji. Don't look too closely at the evidence. You are the architect of the void. You don't build, you unmake." "I unmake," Suji repeated, her voice sounding hollow to her own ears. As they walked toward the temple exit, a girl passed them. She was wearing a gray hoodie, her face partially obscured by a surgical mask. As she passed Suji, she paused. The girl's eyes, sharp, dark, and filled with a terrifying, restless energy, met Suji's. For a second, Suji felt a jolt of recognition so strong it made her nauseous. The girl didn't look like her, not exactly. She was younger, perhaps 19. But she moved with the same rhythmic, calculated gait. She had the same habit of rubbing her thumb against her index finger when nervous. "Who is that?" Suji asked, looking back. "A student," Han said smoothly, her grip tightening on Suji's arm. "Ignore her. She's a ghost of a life you don't need to lead." As Suji climbs into the back of Han's limousine, she glances at the side mirror. The girl in the hoodie has removed her mask. She is staring at Suji with a predatory smile. She raises a hand and mimics the motion of a gun, firing it at Suji's head. That was number 4. Kim's voice echoes in Suji's memory in the present timeline. She was the one who left the hair at the penthouse. It wasn't an accident, Suji. It was an invitation. The descent through the dry cleaner's emergency chute was a claustrophobic slide into darkness. Suji hit the padded basement floor of the neighboring building, a derelict karaoke bar, with the practiced grace of a woman who had rehearsed her own disappearance 1,000 times. Above her, the muffled thuds of heavy boots echoed through the ventilation shafts. Detective Ji-won was in the shop. She was close enough to smell the bleach on Suji's skin. Suji didn't wait. She grabbed her briefcase, the metallic weight of the forensic kit a grounding anchor against the rising tide of her panic. She emerged from the karaoke bar's back exit into a narrow, trash-strewn alleyway. The rain was starting to fall, a cold, acidic drizzle that blurred the neon signs of Mapo-gu into smears of electric pink and blue. Her phone vibrated. A private, encrypted channel. It wasn't Kim. It was Director Han. "The hammer tells me you were distracted at the ether job, Suji." The director's voice was like velvet over a razor blade. "And now, the police are at your doorstep. This is a very untidy narrative." "I was compromised," Suji hissed, ducking behind a row of industrial dumpsters as a police cruiser screamed past the alley entrance. "The DNA at the scene. It was mine, Mother. Older. You told me I was the only one." There was a pause on the line, a silence so heavy it felt like a physical pressure. "The DNA was a ghost, Suji, a remnant. But your reaction? That was very real. You've become sentimental. You're looking for a heart where I only designed a scalpel." "I need answers," Suji said, her voice cracking. "You need to prove you are still the architect," Han replied. "There is a witness, a courier who saw the disruption at the penthouse before you arrived. He is currently being held at a safe house in Incheon. He saw the face of the one who left that hair. If he talks to the police, the entire syndicate becomes visible. Clean him, Suji. If you don't, I'll send number 4 to clean you." The line went dead. The safe house was an abandoned refrigerated warehouse near the docks. The air inside was freezing, smelling of salt and rotting fish. Suji entered through a side door, her sequencer already in her hand. Her instructions were clear. Neutralize. In syndicate speak, that meant more than just cleaning a room. It meant erasing a pulse. In the center of the warehouse, tied to a rusted metal chair, was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 19. He wore a courier's windbreaker, stained with the same amouage perfume Suji had smelled in the penthouse. His eyes were wide, dilated with terror. "Please," he whimpered. "I didn't see anything. I just delivered the package. The woman, she looked like you. I thought it was you." Suji froze. The forensic kit in her hand felt impossibly heavy. "She looked like you." The words triggered a memory flash. The girl at the temple, the sharp, dark eyes, the predatory smile. Suji opened her kit. She didn't pull out the bleach. She pulled out a high-concentration syringe of potassium chloride. One prick, and the boy's heart would stop, mimicking a natural arrest. No narrative, no mess. As she stepped into the light, the boy gasped. You're her. Why did you change your clothes?" "I'm not her," Suji whispered, her clinical mask beginning to fracture. Suddenly, the warehouse's overhead lights flickered. A shadow moved in the rafters above. A small metallic object clattered to the floor near Suji's feet. It was a hair tie. Black, elastic, identical to the one Suji used to pull her hair back when she worked. Suji looked up. Number 4 was perched on a steel beam, silhouetted against a high window. She wasn't wearing a mask now. In the dim light, the resemblance was horrifying. It wasn't just a likeness. It was a biological echo. Number 4 looked like Suji's past come to life, unburdened by conscience or memory. "Mother said you'd hesitate," Number 4 called out, her voice a higher, sharper version of Suji's own. "She said you were getting clogged with old data. Do you want to know a secret, 3? You weren't the first to find your own DNA. Number 2 found it too. That's why she's in the incinerator." Number 4 didn't come to watch. She came to finish the job. She drops a small, pressurized glass canister. It shatters at Suji's feet, releasing a thick, white cloud of forensic eraser gas, a compound Suji herself had designed to destroy all biological evidence in a room within seconds. "If you're the architect," Number 4 laughed, "then build a way out of this." The gas began to burn Suji's lungs. She looked at the boy, then at the exit. If she stayed to save the witness, she would be erased by her own invention. If she ran, she proved she was the monster Han wanted her to be. 2 years ago. The smell was the first thing that hit her. Not the smell of death. Suji was used to that from her days in the SMP, but the smell of herself. It was the scent of the specific shampoo she used, the laundry detergent she preferred, and the faint metallic tang of the pens she chewed when she was stressed. Suji stood in the doorway of a small apartment in Sodemun. She was shaking. This was her first assignment after the accident. Director Han stood behind her, a hand placed firmly on her shoulder. "Focus, Suji," Han whispered. "The SMP thinks this detective was a rogue agent. They think she died in a botched drug bust. It is your job to ensure the evidence supports that reality. Erase the truth. Build the lie." Suji stepped into the room. It was a forensic specialist's apartment. Books on toxicology lined the walls. A microscope sat on the desk. On the floor, near the kitchenette, lay a body covered in a white sheet. Suji's hands trembled as she reached for the edge of the sheet. She pulled it back. The woman under the sheet was her. Same facial structure. Same surgical scar behind the ear. Same callus on the middle finger from years of writing reports. But this version of Suji looked older, her skin weathered by years of a stress she couldn't remember. Who is this?" Suji gasped, stumbling back. "That," Han said, her voice devoid of emotion, "is a failure. She was a forensic specialist named Suji, who got too close to the syndicate. She thought she could dismantle us from the inside. So, we dismantled her. And then, we improved her." Han walked to the desk and picked up a photograph. It showed the dead woman standing next to a younger, smiling Detective Ji-won. "We took her DNA, Suji. We took her brilliance, her skills, her muscle memory. And we removed the noise. We removed the guilt. We removed the friends. You are the refined version. You are the ghost architect." The mystery of the 2016 DNA from the Penthouse was suddenly, brutally answered. Suji wasn't a survivor of an accident. She was a serial clone. The older DNA wasn't from her future. It was from her predecessor, the original Suji who had been murdered and replaced. "Now clean it," Han commanded. If you can clean your own corpse, you can clean anything in this world. This is your initiation. Suji looked at the body of her former self. The sensory trigger hit her. The sound of a ticking clock on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. Each second was a reminder that she was a copy of a dead woman. She picked up a bottle of luminol. She began to spray. She watched as the blood of her predecessor glowed under the light. She began to scrub, erasing the life she used to have, replacing the fingerprints of Detective Suji with the planted evidence of a corrupt junkie. As she worked, she realized the horror of her situation. She wasn't just an employee. She was a biological asset. If she ever rebelled, if she ever became noisy like the woman on the floor, Han would simply kill her and activate the next one. Suji finishes the cleaning. The room is spotless. No trace of the struggle remains. She looks at Han. Is it done? Han smiles, a terrifyingly maternal expression. Almost. There's one more thing. Han leads Suji to the bathroom mirror. She hands her a razor. The original had a mole on her left shoulder. You don't. But to the world, you must be her until we are ready to retire the identity. Cut it into your skin, Suji. Own the lie. In the present, back in the Incheon warehouse, as the eraser gas fills her lungs, Suji touches her left shoulder. She feels the jagged scar she cut into herself 2 years ago. She realizes with a jolt of escalating horror, the older DNA she found in the penthouse wasn't from the woman she cleaned 2 years ago. It was from another one. A version that lived even longer. A version that might still be alive. As Suji collapses from the gas, a hand reaches through the white cloud and grabs her collar. It isn't number 4. It's Detective Ji-won, wearing a tactical respirator. I've been tracking this gas signature for years. Ji-won's voice is muffled by the mask. She looks down at Suji, then at the boy tied to the chair. I found the body in Sodaemun 2 years ago, Suji. I know you died then. So who the hell are you? The air in the Incheon warehouse was a thick, caustic fog. The eraser gas didn't just obscure vision, it disassembled biological bonds. It was Suji's own chemical masterpiece, designed to turn hair, skin cells, and blood into inert dust within 90 seconds. But as Suji lay on the freezing concrete, her lungs burning, the hand gripping her collar wasn't the claw of a ghost. It was Detective Ji-won. Ji-won dragged Suji toward a small, pressurized office at the edge of the floor, kicking the door shut to seal them away from the white haze. The detective ripped off her respirator, her face flushed and glistening with sweat. Her eyes weren't filled with the professional distance of a cop. They were filled with a jagged, desperate grief. Talk, Ji-won rasped, slamming Suji against a filing cabinet. I watched them pull your charred remains off the Mapo Bridge in 2016. I stood at your funeral. Then, 2 years ago, I found your fingerprints at a murder scene in Sodaemun. The same day I found another woman who looked exactly like you, dead in a bathtub. Now I find you here, cleaning up for the syndicate. What are you? A twin? A plastic surgery freak? Suji coughed, a spray of blood flecking her lips. The gas had done its work. The warehouse floor was now biologically silent. The boy in the chair, the courier, he was gone. Not dead, but erased. His DNA, his story, neutralized. I'm a failure, Suji whispered, her voice a dry rasp. That's what Director Han calls us. We aren't twins, Ji-won. We're iterations. Iterations? Ji-won's grip tightened. This isn't a sci-fi movie, Suji. This is Seoul. People don't just get copied. Don't they? Suji gestured weakly to the window. Outside, through the thinning gas, a shadow moved on the rafters. Number 4 was still there, watching. Look at the signature. You've been tracking me for years, haven't you? Not one person, a series. Every time a Suji gets too close to the truth, or her mind starts to fracture from the memories of the one before, they retire her. They use the forensic archives of the original Detective Suji, your partner, to build a better, cleaner. A ghost who knows exactly how the police think. The mystery of the older DNA from the Penthouse was finally laid bare. It wasn't just a remnant, it was a warning. The DNA matched the original Suji, the woman Ji-won had loved and lost. The syndicate hadn't just used her DNA, they were still using her. Somewhere, the source was still being harvested. Ji-won's face went pale. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The woman she was holding wasn't her friend. She was a biological counterfeit using her friend's brilliance to hide the syndicate's sins. You're a monster, Ji-won breathed, her hand moving toward her service weapon. I am, Suji agreed, her eyes cold. But I'm a monster with a limited shelf life. And right now, the upgrade is waiting for us to open this door. Suddenly, the warehouse's internal intercom crackled to life. Director Han's voice filled the room, sounding disappointed, like a mother whose child had failed a simple math test. Detective Ji-won, you were always so persistent. It's a trait I admired in the original. But Suji number 3 is proving to be inefficient. Her emotional attachment to you is a bug in the software. Suji looked at the monitor on the desk. It wasn't showing the warehouse. It was showing a live feed of the National Forensic Service, NFS, headquarters. On the screen, a woman who looked exactly like Suji, but older, grayer, with the sharp, hollow eyes of the woman from the 2016 files, was walking through the high-security gates. The DNA you found in the penthouse wasn't a mistake, Suji, Han's voice purred. It was a beacon. I needed you to lead the detective here so I could finish the collection. The original is still very much alive, working for me in the heart of the government. And now that Ji-won knows the truth, she's become biological waste. The office door's electronic lock chimed. Red. The syndicate had bypassed the manual bolt. Ji-won, run, Suji said, but it was too late. The door hissed open. Number 4 stood there, holding a tactical suppressed submachine gun. But she wasn't looking at Suji. She was looking at Ji-won with a hungry, twisted curiosity. So you're the one the original cried about, Number 4 said. I wonder if your blood smells the same as hers. The reframe was devastating. Suji wasn't the protagonist of this story. She was the distraction. The syndicate had used her to lure the only person who could identify the original Suji into a kill zone. 4 years ago. The rain in Seoul was different back then. It felt cleaner. Or perhaps Suji was just more naive. Detective Suji, the original, sat in a dimly lit bar in Jongno, staring at a glass of soju. Across from her sat Director Han. Back then, Han didn't present herself as a syndicate matriarch. She was Dr. Han, a consultant for the Ministry of Justice specializing in neuroforensic recovery. "You're drowning, Suji," Han said, her voice a soothing balm. "The cases, the bodies, the smells, they're staying with you. You can't sleep. You see the victims when you close your eyes. You're a brilliant forensic mind, but you have a leaky heart." Suji looked at her. She was exhausted. She had just finished the Mapo Bridge case, a series of staged suicides that she knew were murders, but her superiors had ordered her to close. "I want to make it stop," Suji whispered. "I want to do the work without the weight." "I can offer you a choice," Han said, leaning in. "A way to serve justice without the trauma. We are developing a program. It requires a total commitment. We call it the Archive. We take your expertise, your genetic aptitude for forensics, and we place it in a controlled environment. You will still solve the puzzles. You will still clean the truth. But the pain? We can filter that out." The mystery of why the original Suji would ever join the syndicate was answered. It wasn't a kidnapping. It was a surgical betrayal. She had volunteered for what she thought was a revolutionary psychological treatment to help cops handle PTSD. She had handed over her DNA and her memories willingly, believing she was becoming a better version of herself. "What's the catch?" the original Suji asked. "You have to die," Han smiled. "On paper. To the world, Detective Suji must perish so that the architect can be born. You will leave behind your life, your partner, Detective Ji-won." Suji flinched at the name. "Ji-won. She won't stop looking for me." "Then we will give her something to find," Han replied. "A body, a narrative, a closed casket." The original Suji looked at the contract on the table. She thought of the sleepless nights. She thought of the smell of the morgue that never left her skin. She picked up the pen. "If I do this," Suji said, "if I give you my mind, promise me she stays safe." "I promise," Han lied. The reverse timeline revealed the original sin. Suji wasn't just a clone. She was the product of a woman's desperate attempt to escape her own empathy. The headaches Suji felt in the present weren't just neural rejections, they were the leaky heart of the original trying to claw its way back through the genetic code. As the original Suji signs the paper, she pricks her finger to provide the DNA sample. The blood drops onto the white page, forming a pattern that looks identical to the splatter Suji cleaned in the penthouse in Chapter 1. In the present, in the Incheon office, Suji watches Number 4 raise the gun toward Ji-won. She realizes the choice wasn't hers to make. It was made 4 years ago by a woman who thought she could bargain with a viper. Suji doesn't dive for the gun. She dives for the briefcase. She slams the universal key into the warehouse's fire suppression system, but she doesn't trigger water. She triggers the halon gas. "If the system wants to erase us," Suji screams over the roar of the alarms, "then let's see how the upgrade breathes in a vacuum." The room begins to depressurize. Number 4 gasps, dropping the gun as her oxygen-deprived brain stutters. But Suji realizes a horrifying flaw in her plan. The halon will kill Ji-won even faster than it kills Number 4. She has saved her partner by sentencing her to a cleaner death. The roar of the halon discharge was a physical weight, a wall of pressurized silence that sucked the air from the lungs and the heat from the room. It was a clean kill system. No residue, no traces, just the total displacement of oxygen. In the sterile vacuum of the office, Suji watched through tunnel vision as number 4 slumped against the doorframe, her pupils blown wide, her hands clawing uselessly at her throat. The upgrade was biologically superior, but she still required O2 to fire her neurons. Beside Suji, Detective Ji-won hit the floor. Her face was turning a terrifying shade of porcelain blue. Suji's own brain was screaming. Hypoxia. Stage 1, euphoria. Stage 2, cognitive collapse. She had designed this safety protocol for the syndicate's labs. She knew she had exactly 45 seconds before Ji-won's brain began to liquefy from lack of oxygen. She crawled toward her briefcase, her movements sluggish, like she was swimming through heavy syrup. She didn't reach for a weapon. She reached for a breather, a single-use atmospheric rebreather designed for high-altitude jumps. There was only one. She looked at Ji-won. Then she looked at the door. Through the glass, she saw the silhouette of the hammer and a squad of syndicate cleaners approaching through the warehouse, wearing full-face respirators. They weren't coming to save anyone. They were coming to harvest the remains. "I'm sorry," Suji whispered, but the sound didn't travel in the vacuum. She slammed the breather onto Ji-won's face. The hiss of pure oxygen was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Ji-won's chest heaved, her eyes snapping open, gasping in the life-giving gas. But Suji was empty. Her vision began to spark with static, the sensory trigger of her memory fractures. She felt the cold water of the Han River. She heard the screech of tires on the Mapo Bridge. Answered mystery. Why did Han want Ji-won at the warehouse? It wasn't just to kill her. It was to see if Suji, the current iteration, would choose the partner over the system. It was a stress test, and Suji had just failed it. By saving Ji-won, Suji had proven she was noisy. She was now scheduled for retirement. "Go," Suji mouthed to Ji-won, pointing to the ventilation duct above the filing cabinets. Ji-won grabbed Suji's arm, trying to pull her up, but Suji was a dead weight. The door to the office began to groan under the pressure of a hydraulic ram. The syndicate was coming in. "Go!" Suji screamed, find her voice as the halon began to dissipate. Ji-won looked at the door, then at Suji, a look of agonized realization crossing her face. She wasn't just looking at a criminal. She was looking at the ghost of the woman she had buried, dying for her a second time. Ji-won scrambled into the duct just as the office door exploded inward. The hammer stepped over the unconscious form of number 4. He looked at Suji, who was convulsing on the floor, her lungs desperately trying to pull oxygen from the tainted air. He didn't shoot. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sedative. "Director Han wants you conscious for the update, architect," he said, his voice distorted by his mask. "She says it's time to meet the source." As the needle sank into Suji's neck, she saw a shadow emerge from behind the hammer. It was a woman. She was older. She wore a lab coat from the National Forensic Service. She looked down at Suji with a clinical, detached curiosity, the same way Suji looked at a bloodstain. "Is this the one who found the hair?" the woman asked. It was Suji's voice, but deeper, matured by a decade of cold calculation. The original Suji wasn't a victim being harvested. She was the one performing the harvest. October 2016. Mapo Bridge. The rain was a deluge, turning the Han River into a churning maw of gray water. Detective Suji, the real Suji, sat in her car, the engine idling. Her hands were steady on the steering wheel, but her eyes were fixed on the rearview mirror. A black SUV sat 50 yards behind her. Inside was Director Han. The mystery of the accident was finally answered. It wasn't a syndicate hit. It was a staged ascension. Suji had spent months working with Han on the archive project. She had seen the first successful neural transfer in a lab rat. She knew the potential. She knew she could live forever. Her brilliance passed from vessel to vessel, while her physical body, the one that felt the pain, the one that loved Ji-won, the one that grew tired, could be discarded. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ji-won. "Are you coming to dinner? I made the stew you like." Suji stared at the screen. A single tear tracked through the dust on her cheek. This was the leaky heart she wanted to cut out. Empathy was a weakness in forensics. It made you overlook the data in favor of the human story. To be a perfect architect, she had to become the data. She picked up a canister of gasoline from the passenger seat. She began to douse the interior of the car. "For the science," she whispered. She wasn't being forced. She was a fanatic. She believed in Han's vision of a clean world, where crime scenes were managed like bank ledgers. She stepped out of the car, clicked a flare into life, and tossed it through the window. The explosion was a blinding orange blossom in the midnight rain. As the car plummeted over the side of the bridge and into the Han, Suji didn't look back. She walked toward the SUV. Director Han opened the door. "Is the narrative set?" "Dental records are in the glove box," Suji said, her voice already becoming the cold, clinical rasp of the woman in the lab coat. "The bridge cameras have been looped. Ji-won will find the remains tomorrow." "And the first iteration?" Han asked. "She's in the tank," Suji replied. "Born from my blood, but without my memories of the bridge. She'll wake up thinking she's the survivor of an accident.
They stayed like that for an hour, two ghosts sharing a final moment of warmth before the cold took them again. They knew the odds. They knew that entering Namsan was a one-way trip. But as the sun began to bleed through the Incheon fog, they stood up together. The Namsan facility sat atop the mountain like a crown of thorns, its needles of steel reaching for the storm clouds. The security was absolute. Biometric scans, thermal sensors, and a kill-on-sight order for anything that breathed. Amara and Ji-hoon didn't use stealth. They used the chaos of the city's collapsing infrastructure. Using the Widow's hijacked frequencies, Amara flooded the facility's sensors with ghost signals, a digital phantom of an invading army. While the guards scrambled to the perimeter, she and Ji-hoon breached the server core from the ventilation shafts. They found Calder Ross in the heart of the machine. He wasn't hiding, he was waiting. He stood in the center of a glass-walled server room, surrounded by the humming brains of 1,000 digital spies. "You're late, Vesper," Ross said, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. He held a detonator. "I've rigged the core. You upload that drive and this whole mountain goes up. I'd rather be a martyr for a dead agency than a prisoner of a scandalized one." Amara stepped forward, the drive held high. "Then let's burn together, Calder." She didn't hesitate. She slammed the drive into the terminal. The screens in the room went white. A cascade of data, names, faces, bank accounts, execution orders began to stream across the glass. It was the death of an empire in real time. Ross roared, lunging for the detonator, but Ji-hoon was faster. He tackled Ross through the glass wall, the two men crashing into the cooling vats below. Amara watched the progress bar. 98%. 99%. 100%. System deleted. The alarms changed tone. The facility began to vent high-pressure steam. Amara ran to the edge of the cooling vat. Ji-hoon was standing over a broken Ross, his hands bloody, his face expressionless. "It's over," Amara whispered. The mountain didn't explode. Ross had been bluffing, a final play of a desperate man. But the bureau was gone. On every television in Seoul, on every smartphone in the country, the truth was pouring out. The names of the politicians, the crimes of the Accord, and the face of Calder Ross were everywhere. 6 months later, a small cafe in a quiet corner of Jeju Island. A woman with short, dark hair sat at a table overlooking the sea. She didn't have a phone, a tracker, or a name. Across from her, a man with scarred knuckles placed 2 cups of coffee on the table. He didn't say a word, but the way he looked at her was enough. In the distance, a news report on a discarded tablet mentioned the complete restructuring of the National Intelligence Agency. The Vesper program was officially listed as a myth, a ghost story from a darker time. Amara took a sip of her coffee and looked out at the horizon. The web was broken. The spider was gone. For the first time in her life, she wasn't a weapon. She was just a woman watching the tide come in.
Friend. And while she hesitates, Director Han's enforcers are entering the ventilation ducts behind her. Suji's mind raced. She saw the collision clearly now. The past, the original's cold ambition, had met the present, Ji-won's desperate loyalty. And Suji, the bridge between them, was being crushed by the weight of both. "Kim," Suji mouthed, hoping the subdermal mic in her jaw was still active. A split second later, the lab's lights strobed. The PC bang broker had finally breached the NFS firewall. "I'm in," Kim's voice whispered directly into Suji's inner ear. "But Suji, I can't stop the purge. The source has a hardwired override. The only way to save the detective is to give the system what it wants. You have to complete the upload." "What upload?" Suji gasped. "The original isn't just harvesting your DNA," Kim said, his voice frantic. "She's harvesting the cleaning data. Every crime scene you sanitized, every forensic trick you used to hide the syndicate, she's downloading your experience. She's too high profile to get her hands dirty, so she's using you as a remote processor. Once the bar hits 100%, you're empty. You're just a shell." The source leaned over Suji, the needle hovering over the surgical port behind Suji's ear. "Don't fight it, number 3. Become part of something larger. Become the architect of a world without evidence." On the monitor, Suji sees number 4 emerge from a floor hatch behind Ji-won. Number 4 isn't aiming a gun, she's holding a remote detonator. "One choice, 3, number 4's voice echoed through the comms. "Save the cop and let the source delete you, or let me blow the nursery and we can both walk out of here as the only Sujis left. What's it gonna be? Empathy or survival?" Suji felt the cold tip of the needle enter her port. The download began. Her memories, the smell of the penthouse, the sight of the Han River, the sound of Ji-won's laugh, started to turn into lines of binary code on the source's tablet. She was being erased in real time. Suji looks the source in the eye. She doesn't fight the needle. She pushes her head into it. "You want my data?" Suji rasps, a dark, predatory smile breaking across her face. "Take it all. But I've spent 2 years learning how to plant noise. You think you're downloading a cleaner? You're downloading a virus." As the progress bar hits 95%, the source's eyes widen. The tablet begins to glitch. Suji hasn't been cleaning the scenes for the syndicate. She's been subtly altering the data for years, creating a forensic poison pill that is now screaming into the original's own neural network. "What have you done?" the source screams, clutching her head. The collision isn't just a meeting of timelines, it's a total systemic collapse. This is the end of the line. The Mobius strip twists one last time, locking the past and future into a single, inescapable loop. The ghost architect is finished. Now, the system begins. Final chapter: The New Delusion. The laboratory was screaming, not with human voices, but with the electronic shriek of a system rejecting its own blood. On the monitors, the data stream Suji had unleashed, the forensic virus, was tearing through the source's neural architecture. It was a digital cancer made of every lie Suji had ever told, every bloodstain she had moved, and every false fingerprint she had planted. The source collapsed against the surgical table, her hands clawing at her temples. "My mind, it's untidy," she gasped, the clinical precision of her voice breaking into a jagged, terrified sob. Suji felt the magnetic restraints on her wrists hiss and release. Kim had done it. He had crashed the local security grid. Suji rolled off the table, her legs weak, her vision a kaleidoscope of fractured memories. She looked at the source, the woman she was supposed to be, and felt nothing but a cold, forensic necessity. "You wanted a world without evidence," Suji whispered, picking up a heavy glass beaker filled with high-grade acid. "But you forgot the most important rule of the clean. You can't leave the architect behind." Suji didn't hesitate. She didn't offer a monologue. She poured the acid over the source's tablet and the neural mapping interface, melting the only bridge between the original's mind and the archive. The source shrieked as her digital self was severed, leaving her a hollowed-out shell of a woman, her brilliance deleted in a flash of chemical heat. But the collision wasn't over. Suji turned to the monitor. In the nursery, the smoke was clearing. Number 4 stood over the prone body of Detective Ji-won. The younger version, the Echo, was grinning. She had the remote detonator in one hand and a combat knife in the other. "3 is dead," Number 4 shouted into the intercom, her voice manic. "The source is broken. I'm the only one left. I'm the Alpha." Suji picked up the suppressed submachine gun the source had kept for security. She moved toward the nursery, her gait no longer stumbling. The virus hadn't just destroyed the source. It had stabilized Suji. By accepting the noise of her own fractured identity, she had found a terrifying new kind of focus. She entered the nursery. The rows of tanks hummed, 30 versions of her face staring out from the green fluid. Number 4 spun around, her eyes widening as she saw Suji, not the shivering victim, but a predator. "You should have stayed on the table, 3, Number 4 spat, lunging forward with the knife. The fight was short, brutal, and entirely forensic. Suji didn't fight like a soldier. She fought like a woman who knew exactly where the human body was most fragile. She caught Number 4's wrist, twisted until the radius snapped with a wet pop, and drove her palm into the girl's throat. As Number 4 slumped to her knees, gasping for air, Suji stood over her. She looked at Ji-won, who was stirring on the floor, her eyes fluttering open. Ji-won looked at the two Sujis, the monster and the savior, and her face broke into a mask of pure horror. "Suji, please," Ji-won sobbed. Which one? Which one are you?" Suji looked at her old partner. She felt a spark of the leaky heart. She felt the urge to reach out, to explain, to go back to the bar in Jongno and drink soju until the world made sense. But then, the laboratory doors opened. Director Han stepped into the nursery. She was untouched by the chaos. She looked at the melted source, the dying echo, and the standing Suji. She didn't look angry. She looked proud. A masterstroke, Suji, Han said, her voice echoing in the sterile chamber. You didn't just clean the scene. You cleaned the hierarchy. You eliminated the redundancy of the source and the instability of the successor. You have finally become what I always intended. Ji-won scrambled back, pointing her shaking gun at Han. Stay back! I'll kill you both! Suji looked at Ji-won's gun. Then she looked at the rows of tanks. 30 more versions of herself. 30 more girls who would be born into this hell if she didn't end it. She could kill Han now. She could take Ji-won and run. But the Mobius strip had one final turn. If Suji left, the syndicate would simply find another source. They would hunt Ji-won until she was dead. The only way to save the person she loved was to become the thing she hated. She had to own the system to protect the noise within it. Ji-won, Suji said, her voice dropping into a cold, clinical tone. Put the gun down. You're contaminated. You don't belong in this narrative. Suji, no. Ji-won's eyes filled with tears. Suji turned to Director Han. She didn't fire her weapon. She didn't scream. She slowly, deliberately knelt on one knee. She bowed her head, the posture of a loyal knight or a perfect slave. The disruption has been neutralized, Mother, Suji said. The archive is secure, but we need to update the protocol. Number 4 was inefficient. Director Han smiled, placing a cold hand on Suji's head. And what do you suggest, my architect? We don't need Sujis who think they are people, Suji replied, her eyes fixed on the floor. We need a system that thinks it is Suji. Suji looked up. Her eyes were different. The sensory triggers, the smell of the rain, the sound of the clock, were gone. She had chosen a new delusion, that she was no longer a victim of the system, but its master. She had traded her soul for the power to keep Ji-won alive in a cage of her own making. Take the detective to the re-education wing, Suji commanded the syndicate enforcers who flooded the room. And prepare the nursery. Suji walked toward the nearest tank, labeled 05-Architect. She pressed her hand against the glass. The embryo inside shifted, its tiny, unformed face turning toward her touch. Don't worry, Suji whispered to the glass, her reflection merging with the creature inside. I'll make sure you never have to remember a thing. Suji picked up the sequencer and wiped a smudge of blood from the screen, her face a mask of void-like perfection. The scene is finally clean. Begin processing number 5. Series expansion and sequels. The Global Archive. The Ji-won Rebellion. Season 2 could follow Ji-won as she escapes the syndicate, but realizes she has been implanted with Suji's memories, becoming a mental clone who must hunt down Suji to reclaim her own mind. Other syndicates in Tokyo and Berlin reveal their own architects, based on different legendary detectives, leading to a global forensic war where truth is the first casualty. Suji begins to realize that the virus she uploaded didn't just destroy the source. It's starting to make the tanks of Sujis share a collective consciousness, leading to a hive mind uprising.